The New Orleans Saints lose another key free agent, but let's talk about how they'll go about replacing Terron Armstead and how the loss impacts Jameis Winston. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome in to this Wednesday episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that we are free and available on all platforms, including on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays over on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And I want to kick off today's episode with a look at Terron Armstead. The New Orleans Saints were preparing for the potential loss. However, it's still a big one for New Orleans, and now they have a gaping hole to fill. So before we talk about some of the potential in-house and outside free agents or players that can help to sort of fill that hole over on the left side of the offensive line, let's talk about how all of this went down, because this seemed to be something the New Orleans Saints were maybe a little bit more comfortable with inside the organization than most folks looking from the outside. Reportedly, there was an offer that was made to Terron Armstead to keep him in New Orleans at an earlier point in the offseason, but wasn't really what Terron Armstead was looking for, and that may be the point at which the New Orleans Saints and Terron Armstead decided that it was best for them to move forward and allow him to go out and test the market. Remember, the New Orleans Saints were working against the timeline a little bit. Once that new league year started, about $13 million of dead cap kicked in under Terron Armstead's name, and the only way to make sure that that wasn't going to happen was to extend him before his contract became void as the new league year began. At that point, anything that you're doing is new money on top of the dead money that is already effectively under his name. So you're talking about $13 million already being there, and then a potential of up to $18 million per year on average being on top of that. That's a lot of money to invest. It's over $30 million that you have invested in 2021 under someone's name on average. Now, of course, we know base salaries can stay low, signing bonuses can extend out, and therefore keep that hit low. There are ways to counteract all of that. And of course, we know that, we've explored that, we've looked at that here on the show before, particularly when we're going through our mock off season. But if you look at where it is that the New Orleans Saints and Terron Armstead seemed to be from the very beginning, it seemed that with them allowing him to go out and test the market and him being interested in testing the market, that this is sort of where this was all going in the first place. So New Orleans was preparing. They've had options. They have some in-house things that they can do. We'll break all that down a little bit. But when we look at Terron Armstead's contract that he got from the Miami Dolphins, which brings him back with Teddy Bridgewater, brings him back with an old coach as well, we're talking about 5 years, $75 million here, $15 million per year, with about $43 million guaranteed. And I know the number that's sticking out to you when I say that. $15 million per year, Ross? Couldn't the New Orleans Saints figure that out? Well, remember, it's not just about the average per year. There is also some incentives here that can bump this contract up to $87.5 million. That makes it $17.5 per year. And you'll remember that when we did the mock off season on Monday, one of the things that I talked about was actually giving Terron Armstead a contract that averaged $18 million per year, thinking that that would undercut him. The tackle market's been weird, and that may actually work in the Saints' favor in terms of some of those other free agents that are out there if they're looking to go the stopgap approach. But why didn't the New Orleans Saints match or exceed $15 million per year? As we continuously say, it's not just about the average. It's about the length of the deal. It's about the guaranteed money, all of that. $43 million guaranteed plus, that's over half of this contract. That's over 50% of this contract for a guy that's 30 years old on the other side of 30 years old and has had injury issues. 5-year commitment by Mike McDaniel and the Miami Dolphins may have also played a factor. Maybe the Saints only wanted to give him a 3-year deal, but he wanted more longevity in a 5-year deal, right? Maybe they only wanted to give him a 1 or 2-year deal, but he wanted more longevity, and he was able to find that with the Miami Dolphins on a 5-year deal. This is a really, really good deal for both Miami, and honestly, it's a really good one for Terron Armstead as well, who hasn't played a full 16-game season in his career. But when you lose a 9-year vet, a guy that has been the best, if not one of the best, right, if you want to hedge it a little bit, left tackles in the NFL when healthy and on the field, there's no denying that that's a huge loss for the New Orleans Saints. So yeah, they didn't go out there and like try to play ball and sit there and try to out bargain, another team. They didn't get into a bidding war. And we have seen this from the New Orleans Saints time and time again. This is what they do. They set a price, and if you go above that price, then maybe they'll see you in a couple of years, a la Mark Ingram. They also moved on from Jimmy Graham for similar reasons, right? They don't really go above those prices. They did it with Ndamukong Suh. They do it with incoming free agents as well. They'll set a price, and they're not going to go above that. And that might have been exactly what happened with Terron Armstead. Not just about the price in terms of average money committed per year. It could have been about signing bonuses. It could have been about guaranteed money. It could have been about the length of the contract, right? The contract life, like we talked about, where maybe the Saints didn't want to overcommit for 5 years to a post 30-year-old left tackle that has injury issues, even though he has been one of the best left tackles in the NFL, like we were talking about. And so maybe that's what it was. Maybe Terron Armstead simply just wanted to go elsewhere. The Saints could have matched the deal if they wanted to, but if Terron Armstead saw a better opportunity elsewhere, then Terron Armstead's going to go with the better opportunity elsewhere, just like we saw with Marcus Williams. As we understand it, Marcus Williams took that $14 million per year average deal in Baltimore, which was akin to what he was offered in New Orleans last year. He didn't take the one in New Orleans last year. They didn't work on he didn't take a contract with New Orleans this year, and he took a similar contract to what was initially reported to have been offered to him last year, this year in Baltimore. Why? Because he wanted to go play in Baltimore. Maybe it didn't have anything to do with the money, right? This is a team that's in flux, and I know that this is out of the ordinary. Usually what we're used to is seeing these guys take these home field discounts, these hometown discounts, staying in New Orleans, wanting to play with Drew Brees. That's not the reality anymore. And by the way, there were several different reports around the idea that Terron Armstead was waiting to see what was going to happen with Deshaun Watson before he ended up, signing anywhere, and that he could have stayed in New Orleans if Deshaun Watson had been traded. Maybe. There were also some ideas out there that the relationship between Jameis Winston and Terron Armstead were really strong and that he could potentially stay to play with Jameis Winston. That didn't happen. So who's to say that he would have stayed to play with Deshaun Watson either, knowing that Deshaun Watson may not even be able to start the 2022 season, depending upon how everything continues on with his legal situation. So it is a not necessarily a surprising turn of events, because a lot of people expected, the New Orleans Saints are probably going to have a hard time keeping either or, let alone both Marcus Williams and Terron Armstead. And clearly the Saints saw it that way too, because they've been preparing for the potential loss of Terron Armstead as well. If you look at contracts, if you look at all these other pieces, a lot of this makes sense. So let's talk about where the New Orleans Saints can go outside of free agency, what the free agent tackle market looks like, and how it actually benefits New Orleans if they want to go the stopgap route. And then we'll talk about the in-house options to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market. Built Bar, the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. And if you haven't tried the Built Puffs yet, you are missing out. The world's first protein-infused marshmallow. I don't know how they did it, but they figured out how to make marshmallows healthy. You're talking about 17, 18 grams of protein, 4 or 5 grams of sugar, 4 or 5 net carbs. Compare that to a candy bar, right? We're talking about protein bars that taste like candy bars here. Compare it to a candy bar. You're talking about 300 calories, tons of sugar, tons of carbs, as compared to what you're getting with a Built Bar with the same deliciousness, maybe even more delicious than candy bars, because Built Bar focuses on making the bar taste good first. Then they pack it with protein and make sure that it's healthy. So go and check it out. Make sure it's a part of your plan. If you're doing any kind of New Year's resolution, you're still going strong, but you need something midday to help you wrap up the day, Built Bar is a great option for you and a great piece of your plan that you have going on. So go and check them out over at built.com. Don't forget to use the promo code LOCK15, LOCKEDON15, so you can get 15% off. That's 15% off with the promo code LOCK15 at built.com. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Usually I take a moment to pitch the Locked On NFL page, which I still say go and check out. But we know everything that took place in New Orleans, Ninth Ward, Arabi, all the stuff going on. So I just want to say, first of all, for those of you that are either impacted by the storm, the tornadoes, stuff like that, that prayers to you. And if there's anything that I could do, reach out. And obviously, I'll put some stuff in the description as well for funds to help out, like where you can donate, things like that. So, but the big thing is like go to the community and go and help out. Go get your hands dirty, all of that. So I just wanted to make sure that I've at least paid some respect to that. And I'm so sorry. It's such a terrible situation. And I hate that like every year it seems like we got to have this type of like a little quick insert around something that happened. So I look forward to those no longer being the days. All right, so let's get to the distraction here. For those of you that have been impacted but want a distraction, let's keep talking about some football. So Terron Armstead on the way out in New Orleans, but there are some options on free agency that they could potentially go to. And the way that this tackle market has broken out in free agency so far, Saints could actually be in a good place here. Now, remember, replacing Terron Armstead, high task. Doesn't matter who you get. Doesn't matter who's in-house. It is not an easy situation to navigate. But the Saints got a little bit of help because the tackle market not in New Orleans, but in free agency for the NFL has been light, to say the least. I mean, listen to some of these contracts. Terron Armstead, $15 million per year in terms of what that base contract is, sure. But then the next highest, you got maybe Lael Collins, who got a 5-year, $50 million deal with the Bengals. That's $10 million per year. Trenton Brown sticking around with the Patriots, 2 years, $13 million. That's $6.5 per year. Morgan Moses signing a 3-year deal with the Ravens at what, $15 million? That's $5 million per year. I mean, this market hasn't really hit the peak that we expected to. We thought we were going to see resetting type contracts, $22 million, $20 million, all of that. And Brandon Scherff got his money. But in terms of what the majority of this tackle free agency class has brought in, this is good news for New Orleans if they decide to go the stopgap route, right? If they decide to go the stopgap route, then you're looking to bring in a veteran who can compete to start a year over on the left side while the Saints maybe also go to the draft, kind of double up at the position, or they work in-house on some of the young guys that they have, Ethan Greenidge, Landon Young, some of these other guys that they could potentially spend the 2022 season getting ready for 2023. And then you would have the 2022 draft, 2023 free agency, and 2023 draft to where you can basically try to find your replacement for Terron Armstead. And so if they wanted to do that, here are 4 veteran tackle names to keep an eye out on. Dwayne Brown of the Seattle Seahawks. We'll highlight each of these as we go through, but just to get the names out there. Dwayne Brown of the Seattle Seahawks, Eric Fisher of the Indianapolis Colts, Nate Solder, most recently of the New York Giants, and then Brian Balaga, most recently of the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, some of these names you'll remember from other teams. Eric Fisher with the Chiefs, for instance. Nate Solder with the Patriots, for instance. Balaga with the Packers, for instance. And that's just where we are right now in terms of this market. Now, here's the tricky part. Every single one of these players is 30 years or older, is above 30 years old, and will be 32, 31, 34 by the time that the NFL season begins here in 2022. Dwayne Brown, presently 36 years old. Eric Fisher, 31. And then Nate Solder and Brian Balaga, both 33 years old. So these aren't long-term options, right? These are stopgap options. This is one season. Come to New Orleans, help out, and we appreciate you. Thank you very much for coming through. We'll see you soon. Like, that's the type of situation that this is gonna have. So if we go back and we look at the mock offseason that we did on Monday, I had Terron Armstead returning to New Orleans on a $5.1 million cap hit, but an $18 million per year deal. So now that he's no longer in the picture, heading to Miami to pair back up with Teddy Bridgewater, Teddy Two Gloves, we are looking for a new tackle, right? And if we decide to do that in free agency, there are a couple of ways that you can do it. You could just go with a straight up 1-year deal. You'll probably have to come in above vet minimum, right? You're not going to get any of these guys on vet minimum. Dwayne Brown, the Seattle Seahawks are going to have interest in keeping him more than likely. Yeah, they've got that 9th overall pick now where they could walk away with a draft prospect like Trevor Penning or Charles Cross. Both would be very bad news for the New Orleans Saints because you'd love to see one of those guys fall to 18 if you're New Orleans, but that seems unlikely. So you're going to have a little bit of competition there because even if they don't get one of those guys, they're going to want to have somebody there. So Dwayne Brown may be going back to Seattle. Eric Fisher, Nate Solder, Brian Balaga, so far, not much of a market for those guys, at least visibly, right? We're not hearing about them going on visits or anything like that. Now, Brian Balaga is a right tackle, so that might rule him out because if you're going to sign Brian Balaga to stick him over at right tackle, you're moving Ryan Ramczyk over to left tackle. We'll talk about in-house options in a little bit, but you don't need to spend the money to do that. You have what's necessary for you to be able to achieve that already. So I would say that probably crosses him out. So the two that seem most likely to me out of these four, they might go out and find like a younger guy or, a lower level free agent to just bring in and add to depth or to compete. But out of these four, in terms of the veteran tackles that are left on the board, Eric Fisher, Nate Solder make the most sense. Eric Fisher has dealt with some injuries, as has Nate Solder, but Eric Fisher has played 15 games in the last 2 seasons. Nate Solder has played 16 games over the last 4 seasons. And the only game that Nate Solder missed last year was, of course, going up against a former team of his. So when we kind of break down or look at what seems most likely, I think it's one of those two guys. Neither of those guys are you signing on a vet minimum, regardless of their age. So what you're probably looking at doing is getting above Morgan Moses' number, the $5 million per year. So you could do a 2-year deal flat out, and you could do a 2-year, $10 million deal, backload it, go vet minimum this year, give a $5 million signing bonus, and you're paying about $3.6 million to either one of these guys in terms of a cap hit in 2022. And then you have a heavier cap hit in 2023 that you can either move on from based upon guarantees, things like that. You can do a $10 million deal, but only guarantee $6 million, which you're out from under once you give a $5 million signing bonus and this year's vet minimum. That way, the larger chunk of the money next year isn't really guaranteed, and you walk away with $2.5 million of dead cap if you move on from one of them, or you go the void contract route, right, or the void year route, and you do a vet minimum base salary, but you give a $6 million signing bonus so that they're effectively getting a $7 million deal. But then you add a void year so that you can move on from them after this year, and you've got $3 million of dead cap. You can even add more void years if you want to, but then you're just going to accelerate once they move on anyway, so it doesn't make a difference. So there are ways to save money and get these in. I know that was boring contract talk, sorry, but the mechanisms and everything are important in terms of how the New Orleans Saints can navigate this situation. What that allows you to do is bring in, let's just say it's Eric Fisher, but just for the sake of, no, let's have fun. Let's say it's Nate Solder, right? So Nate Solder comes in, he plays a year for you. Hopefully you get 13 or 15 games out of him. You have James Hurst as your backup, and then hopefully you're able to keep the rest of the offensive line healthy. If that happens, then you're in a pretty good place because, again, you also have this year's draft that you can invest in a young talent in the second or third round, or Rasheed Walker, for instance, like we did in our mock draft on Monday out of Penn State. And then you have, other guys like Falele, the big dude, like there's Bernard Raymond, like there's a ton of different options that you can dig into. And then you move into next offseason, and then you've got free agency again, and then you've got the draft again. So you have time to, by using a stopgap, find your next solution for sure. You get 3 swings at it effectively, plus a trade market. So not a bad situation for them to be in. They could do that without breaking the bank, and they could actually do that if we went with my model of the 2-year deal. Then that comes in at $3.5 million, $3.6 million in terms of base salary. So you actually save money on them based upon what I had as my figure for Terron Armstead in 2022. So that also saves you some money so that you can go for a higher level slot receiver. Now that, let's say, both Jamison Crowder and Zach Pascal are off the board, you want to make a higher pursuit at Jarvis Landry. You now have the ability to do that. You want to funnel some more money into a perimeter wide receiver. You now have the ability to do that. So that's where these guys help. Now let's talk about the impact on Jameis Winston as well as the in-house free agents, because if the focus is continuity, familiarity, cohesion, you might have an option here that Jameis Winston is already very comfortable with because he experienced it for 3 games last season. And we can talk about how successful that worked for Jameis Winston and James Hurst. So we'll get to that as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. But first, I'm so excited because today's episode is also brought to you by our friends over at Athletic Greens. I started taking Athletic Greens AG1 powder like a year ago, and I love this stuff. It's the first thing I do in the morning. I get up, brush my teeth, and then I get my AG1. And it's just 1 scoop and about 12 to 16 ounces of water. Shake it up, drink it, and it basically acts as a multivitamin. I hate taking pills and stuff like that. I have trouble with it. So this basically just being like a green juice that I can just drink right away in the morning, first thing before I have my cup of coffee, all of that is awesome. And basically what it does is that it lines your stomach with probiotics and vitamins and minerals, everything that you need, which helps you digest throughout the day and just honestly helps pick you up throughout. Like I was feeling sluggish and things like that. And then I started using Athletic Greens, and then within the first week, I could feel the difference. And I'm not even playing. Like I use this stuff all the time. I use it every single morning. So I highly recommend that you check this out over at athleticgreens.com/NFL. Network. Right now, it is time for you to reclaim your health and go ahead and arm your immune system with a convenient daily nutrition that you need, especially heading into flu and cold season. I've been dodging it all season so far, so this has been helpful. It's just 1 scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills or supplements to look out for your health. And they're going to make it easier for you. So to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a 1-year free supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NFL network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NFL network so that you can take ownership of your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutrition insurance. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a quick look now at how this all impacts Jameis Winston and the New Orleans Saints in-house options, because there might be an option here that Jameis Winston is like most comfortable with. And because of that, that might be the way to go. But before we get into it, I was just watching the NFL's craziest offseason get even crazier. Tyreek Hill of the Kansas City Chiefs, who has his own complicated past, reportedly, potentially about to be on his way to the Miami Dolphins, along with Terron Armstead and Teddy Two Gloves. So this is an interesting development. How does this impact the New Orleans Saints? Well, one of our big targets that I've talked about in terms of mock off seasons, is that one of the Locked On Saints big targets, right, that you and I have talked about, was Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And Marquez Valdes-Scantling is currently on a visit to the Kansas City Chiefs because they want to replace a deep threat for a deep threat. So something to watch. New Orleans Saints continuing to fall behind the ball when it comes to this wide receiver class. And honestly, it's a little unfortunate. So I want to talk about how this move of losing Terron Armstead impacts Jameis Winston. But one of the big things here is that if the Saints can't put any weapons around Jameis Winston, then nothing's going to help Jameis Winston aside from Michael Thomas. So it's just unfortunate that we continue to watch these wide receivers fly off the board and end up going places. And usually I'm like really defensive about the sort of patient approach that the New Orleans Saints usually take. But that was when they had Drew Brees under center and Sean Payton at head coach. Right now, you've got a first-year head coach for your system, right? He has coached before Dennis Allen, unsuccessfully though, in Oakland. And then now you have at least a quarterback, but you're not helping the quarterback, or you're not able to help the quarterback yet because either you're falling behind on these negotiations or you're not offering enough or whatever. And you have cap space. I don't know. It's interesting, but maybe they're just looking to go to the draft with this and then try to carry as much money over into 2023 as possible. Maybe this is a little bit of like, be competitive, but also prepare for a reset type of a situation. I don't know, but got to get on it. Got to get some weapons in New Orleans. And if you get the weapons, then you also have to take care of the protection, of course. And so the Saints losing Terron Armstead, big deal for them. But there's an in-house option that I think Jameis Winston might be most comfortable with. So we talk about how this impacts Jameis Winston. Well, first of all, you lose your blindside tackle. That means that no matter what weapons you could potentially put around him at this point, there's not a lot of, you have time, or you're going to be able to do it right if you fail to replace that position. Thankfully for New Orleans, they've already built in sort of some potential replacements here. Now, we've talked about the option of moving Ryan Ramczyk to left tackle. If they do that, then there are already incentives built into Ryan Ramczyk's contract that would elevate his contract for $1 million over the remainder of his contract lifespan if he gets an all-pro nod at the position, so first or second team. The other option, if they do that, would then be to plug in James Hurst at right tackle. But if they decide to keep Ryan Ramczyk at right tackle, you could just plug James Hurst right in at left tackle. James Hurst did this. He appeared at left tackle last year for 11 games, and that includes a game where he only played like 2 snaps and stuff like that, and a couple of games where he played around 20. But he appeared at left tackle quite a bit. We've also seen him used a bunch as, the 6th offensive lineman, all of that. We'll circle back to that in a moment because that might not be as necessary this year. The New Orleans Saints with James Hurst, or James Hurst with the New Orleans Saints at left tackle in 10 games allowed just 11 pressures and 1 sack. And at left tackle, he allowed 2 more sacks at right tackle, but he allowed only 1 at left tackle. If you look at the 3 games that James Hurst and Jameis Winston played together with James Hurst at left tackle, you saw 1 sack that was against New England. And then you saw 22 pressures as a whole by the team allowed on Jameis Winston in that Washington game. But the majority of those actually came from Ryan Ramczyk's side, not James Hurst's side. Now, when Chase Young is over on that side and he packs 7 pressures. And then you also have Ioannidis, who had 5 more pressures in that game. Yeah, that's going to happen, of course. But for the New Orleans Saints, they actually did a good job plugging in at left tackle when Jameis Winston was under center early on in the season when they were without Terron Armstead. Now, the 3 opponents in those games were, of course, the New England Patriots, the New York Giants, and the Washington, at the time, football team, now Washington Commanders. So not the most terrifying pass rushes of all, with the exception of that Washington defensive line that wreaked havoc all over Jameis Winston, but the Saints still won that game. But in terms of just the left side of the line, they did pretty well there. And so I think James Hurst is probably your in-house favorite to step into that role based upon what he was able to do last year, what he showed there, that he already knows the system. He's been there for multiple years. They've extended him. They've also built in incentives to elevate his contract a bit if he ever becomes a starter. So there are those things that are already built in. And that's one that Jameis Winston, I mean, again, you look at 1 sack allowed over those 3 games, not a lot of pressures allowed from that side on those 3 games. I think you're probably pretty comfortable with James Hurst stepping in there now that you've had 3 games of experience with him in that role. So that's what I would look at for the New Orleans Saints in terms of an in-house option. Now, if you use James Hurst in your starting lineup, then you lose him as your 6th offensive lineman. Not a big deal. You've got Calvin Throckmorton, who also served that role really well. He can play inside, he can play outside, all of that. But you do lose some depth, so you still have to pay attention to depth. It was one of the reasons why in the mock-off season we brought back Jordan Mills. It's one of the reasons why I think even if you were to go down this route in the 3rd, 4th round, you should still be looking for an offensive tackle, a young offensive tackle that can develop. And then you've also got Landon Young. The thing about the 6th offensive lineman is that if the idea of Taysom Hill under center is done with, maybe it's beyond the conversation of the quarterback competition being done, and it's simply that they're just not going to use him in that quarterback role at all, which would make sense, and they just want to use him as a pass catcher. As a team that struggled to find pass catching talent from their tight ends last year, Taysom Hill effectively being on a very good tight end contract, then use him at tight end. That makes perfect sense, either as a blocker or as a pass catcher. That helps to elevate that room a little bit. If he's not going to be under center, then maybe the 6th offensive line function kind of goes away a little bit for New Orleans. Not goes away completely, right? But definitely is something that you don't see 10, 12 times in a game, right? So if that's the case, saving James Hurst for those reps, not as big of a deal, or losing James Hurst for those reps, not as big of a deal. If you go from doing that 10 to 12 times a game to 3 to 7 times a game, way, way big difference. And then you can go with maybe the more developing talent in that role. So look for James Hurst to be the guy. A couple of other options would be Ethan Greenidge or Landon Young. Landon Young, I think they got him as a left tackle out of Kentucky and immediately put him behind Ryan Ramczyk at right tackle. So that's an uphill climb. Ethan Greenidge, big time uphill climb. Him and Doug Marrone would have to make a lot of progress in terms of what we've seen on the field from Ethan Greenidge when he's had to come in emergency situations to get him to the place of being a starter. I mean, if we're just being honest, like, it hasn't been there for that guy. So James Hurst should be well ahead of that. Ethan Greenidge would be next, and then Landon Young again behind that in terms of left tackle. The other option, of course, again, moving Ryan Ramczyk to left tackle, plugging in James Hurst at right tackle, another situation you would imagine that Jameis Winston would be comfortable with. And will it be Jameis Winston actually under center for New Orleans in 2022? I certainly think so, but some draft analysts think it might be Kenny Pickett. Let's tear all of that down tomorrow as we continue on with Locked On Saints. I appreciate you as always for making us a part of your day and making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, who are not wasting time with first-round quarterbacks for the New Orleans Saints. They're going after wide receivers. You can go and check out their mock draft from earlier on this week, Ryan Tracy, as well as Eric Crocker, former NFL cornerback. So go and check them out over at the Locked On NFL Draft podcast, wherever you're listening to this podcast, or on YouTube if you're watching. Hey, hello, appreciate you. Once again, look for description, links and stuff like that in the description to help out with the tornado and the storms, all of that. If I can find some stuff, I'll get it in there and everything. And then, of course, as always, we are with you 100%. We're back with you tomorrow with more episodes, potentially more distraction for those of you who need it. I appreciate you as always for still finding a way to make me a part of your day today in particular. And as always, if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints, you can always follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.